Failure is a very vulnerable experience. It's the idea of realizing you did something wrong. But what if you didn't really believe it was your fault? And what if you had the power to do something about it? For thousands of years, the idea of failure has been a sort of double-edged sword. Failing at something is this negative outcome, the direct opposite of succeeding in whatever goal we gave ourselves. However, it is also viewed as something to learn from and to be better at next time. Lao Tzu, a name I'm still not sure whether I'm pronouncing correctly, was a Chinese philosopher from around 500 BC, and one of the first ever writings on failure was him stating that failure is an opportunity. This is all well and good. It puts a lot less pressure on succeeding all of the time, with the idea of gradual improvement rather than a black and white view of failure and success. However, it feels notable to mention that there are different levels to how much we can fail. One bad grade on an arbitrary test is completely different to failing to get a PhD at the last hurdle. Both instances at their core can be boiled down to a failure, however, one is going to leave a much bigger impact than the other. And while humans are very logical and intelligent creatures, we're also very emotional. So when a failure is so big and so personal, it's common to feel angry and to feel frustrated and to not think about the learning curve. All we think about is the effort we put in and how we still didn't succeed. Eventually, most people would realize where they went wrong and get over the failure, but what if they didn't believe it was their fault and they blamed someone else? Lao Tzu wrote about this too, stating that if you blame someone else, there is no end to the blame. Now, you might be wondering where I'm going with this. The title and the thumbnail say I'm going to be talking about Bendy and the Ink Machine, not Chinese philosophy, but stay with me now. This story, this timeline of events from the effort to the failure to the blame that's never ending, is exactly what happened to the owner of an animation company, Joey Drew. If you clicked on this video, chances are you've heard of Bendy and the Ink Machine, and probably know what it's about. A really visually appealing horror game inside a old 1950s animation studio that has been turned into this hellish labyrinth filled with inky creatures and psychotic characters and so much soup. And that's all I thought it was too. A massively popular game from 2017 with a sequel or two, and that was that. But after scrolling through my Steam library of unplayed games, I found Bendy and decided to give it a go. The gameplay was pretty good. An amazing first two chapters and a slight fall off for the final three. But it's not the gameplay I'm here to talk about, rather the story behind it. Throughout the game you find these videotapes that tell a story through multiple people's perspectives. These tapes tell the story of Joey Drew Studios through the employees and occasionally Joey Drew himself. And as you could have guessed by now, it was not a story of success, but rather a story of failure. Joey Drew was a bad businessman. Now, I know that sounds harsh. Well, it is harsh, but it's true, and it's what makes the story so good. He founded Joey Drew Studios with us, Henry Stein, in the 1930s. But shortly after creating the character of Bendy, Henry left to spend more time with his wife as the company was taking up almost all of his life. Despite losing a valuable member of the company, Joey Drew continued to make his business thrive, and for a while it did. The character of Bendy excelled and brought out new revenue in merch sales, and even allowed for new characters such as Alice Angel and Boris the Wolf. However, a lot of people at the company weren't exactly happy with their work. Wally Franks, the caretaker, is always talking about how much he wants to leave. Sammy Lawrence, the musical composer, complains with all the noise from both the people and the ink machine, thanks to Joey.
Thanks, Joey. Just what I needed. More distractions. These stupid cartoon songs don't write themselves, you know?
Even the projectionist, Norman Polk, notices Joey's quirks.
I've got half a mind to talk to Mr. Drew about all this, I really do. But then again, I have to admit, Mr. Drew's got his own peculiarities.
Still, as a CEO of the studio, Joey worked and worked for so long on characters, music, attractions, merchandise, all to make his business a success. However, due to some awful decisions with the company's money in an attempt to create the theme park Bendyland, the company soon began to fall apart. This didn't prompt Joey to rethink his actions. Instead, he worked his employees harder in order to fight the losing battle of bankruptcy. He tried cutting corners by not paying his employees fairly and overworking them, threatening to fire them if they did not work the unpaid overtime. He didn't fix hazards within the building, such as faulty electricals and a weak plumbing system. Joey tried to deny all these claims against his company in newspaper interviews. However, the company eventually shut down, filing for bankruptcy. And that would be the end to a very sad story of a man who just couldn't run his business and lost everything. Only Joey was obsessed with the company, spending hours coming up with new ways to keep it alive, only for each attempt to fail. But these were not treated as learning experiences. Instead, Joey dug himself deeper into a hole of bad decisions, not stopping to reflect, not learning from any of them, and failing again and again. And when the company could not continue and there was nothing left to fail at, he still had the chance to learn from his mistakes. Instead, he ignored that chance and blamed Henry instead. And like with his company, once he had a direction to point the blame, he just couldn't stop himself. During this phase of poor management, Joey created the ink machine, a technological wonder that produced a special type of lifelike ink so that in the theme park Bendyland, characters could interact with the guests. Even though the company failed, the ink machine and its power remained. And when Joey was driven mad with anger towards Henry, he used the ink machine and its strange power to fuel his rage. Joey learned how to create an alternate dimension, an inky version of his old studio, and created a version of Henry too. This is who we really play as, this fake version of Henry, forced to wander and fight and flee through this alternate dimension, replicating the studio Henry once worked in. This elaborate torture chamber is not only meant to show Henry, to show us the failure of the company, but to blame us for it. We left and the company fell into ruin, and this psychotic display of rage and obsession points the finger at us as we walk through a gallery of everything we could have prevented. It's exactly what Lao Tzu spoke about. If you blame someone else, there is no end to the blame. And there truly is no end. After defeating the Ink Demon and escaping the studios in Chapter 5, we meet Joey himself and find out that this ink version of ourselves has gone through this series of events known as the Cycle. Going through one more time, we now have this device that allows us to see what we ourselves have written on the wall alongside all the other graffiti, and it makes the game that much more horrifying. Warnings like turn back or don't turn on the machine, pleading for this eternity to end. And the tally marks showing just how many times Henry has walked this path. It really puts into perspective the severity of Joey Drew's mental state, watching the cycle over and over again, just to feel better about himself. Even as an old man, he still blames us. He recognizes his failed company, or as he calls it, a crooked empire. Yet he tells us that we should have pushed him harder, that we were the reason he didn't succeed.
The truth is, you were always so good at pushing, old friend. Pushing me to do the right thing. You should have pushed a little harder.
We're invited back into the studio once again, only to undergo the same torturous hell again and again and again. I really liked Bendy and the Ink Machine. While some others online like to critique games a lot, especially with new releases nowadays, it was really fun to write this script and just talk about a great story, something that was intentionally written and woven into the game to give us another side of the studio, in comparison to the dramatic horror we walk through. It's a beautifully sad story that at first I didn't give enough credit. When I found out that none of it was real, I felt like I'd been cheated out of a good horror story ending. But the actual story is not horror, it never intended to be. While the game itself does have great horror elements, the story is a tragedy, told through so many people's experiences in a company that just couldn't keep up.